Good morning and welcome to Let's Coach 2023. I am Lani Kim, one of the coaches here on the Life Coach University campus, and welcome. Welcome back if you are coming back, and welcome if you've never been here before. If you've never been here before, I highly encourage you after this session to go and check out campus. There are not only sessions for Let's Coach, there's monthly workshops by different coaches here on campus, and I encourage you to check out the different coaches. So today, I'm going to be talking about creating your community and your network. And I think this is a very overlooked tool, resource for us, that we intentionally look through our lives and take stock of the relationships that we have, and to definitely be grateful for those relationships, but also looking into where are the gaps? Where could we use a relationship that we don't have yet? And it's so easy in our busy, fast-paced lives to think that the opportunity will present itself. But I want to invite you to think purposely about these relationships. So number one, or not number one, let me talk a little bit about friendships, relationships, network, because I think often network is often put in a business context, and that is a great thing. But I want to invite you to think about network simply as if you think of a web and you think that each intersection is a person in your life. What does that interconnection of different relationships in your life look like? Is it a web, a network of people that is holding you up? Or are there missing gaps here and there? Now, again, this could be a business relationship. It could be a friendship. It could be a relationship with a family member. And then there are these other relationships that we often don't acknowledge. We don't, and maybe they exist in your life and you just don't realize them. And here's an opportunity to acknowledge that relationship and maybe pour into it a little more purposefully. We have mentors, right? There are acquaintances. There are people that you know in your life that you may not have a specific term for. And acquaintance is the title I have a lot for a lot of people in my life. We don't have per se a friendship where we are going out socially to do maybe fun things, right? But we do meet on a regular basis for other reasons. And even though they may not be friendships, those relationships are just as important to me as my friendships. They are part of that network that holds me up. So I want you to think about, what does that look like in your own life? And I want to encourage you to take out a pen or pencil, some type of writing instrument, and actually get a notebook. Actually get a notebook and write down these different types of relationships, your friendships, your personal, your family, business, right? And you could just have an others category. You don't even have to know what to call it, right? And so, what does that look like in your life? What does that look like? Who are the people who are in those columns? And this is an important exercise, even if you feel like you have all the relationships that you need. Because when you get this down on paper and you realize the role that people play in your life, you can be more intentional about the relationships you already do have and to really maximize those relationships on both ends, as a giver, as a receiver. And think of those times that you are spending with the different people in these different categories. When you're intentional about these relationships and you have written them down or at least thought about them, and you understand and are grateful for the role that that relationship plays in your life, right? Number one, you get to go to that relationship with more gratitude. Number two, you understand the role that that relationship plays in your life. And the reason that it's nice, number one, to be grateful, number two, to do this when you're not in a crisis mode, is as you take a look at this list and you are intentional and you understand the role that each of these relationships plays, when you are in a time of in your life of, number one, you have something to give, you know who to give it to, right? Number two, when you are in need. And this is where so often our brains go into primitive thinking when we're in need, right? Your brain kicks in that survivor instinct, that primitive brain, like, oh, I got to feed myself. I've got to clothe myself. I need shelter. I need these basics of life that you probably already have, but your brain is still thinking, right, in a very primitive way, because all the luxuries we have in life currently, really, if you think back, these are not things that people have had for very long. So if you even think of your grandparents, right, they probably went through some kind of world change. And they did have to worry about something. Maybe it was safety. Maybe it was basic necessities like food and shelter. And so where we are today, we have to remember, literally genetically, that our brains are wired for that survival instinct. And it's just in the last couple of decades where we've lived this life of abundance, even when we don't acknowledge how abundant our life is. So that primitive brain is still really strong. And when you are in distress, stressed, or tired, or overwhelmed, your primitive brain's going to be really focusing on just feeding itself, clothing itself, conserving energy. So the thought to go and extend yourself into the network that you have and to think about who could help you out at that moment is the last thing your primitive brain is going to do for you. It's going to really want to conserve energy. And thinking outside the box a little bit is the antithesis of that, or it's the antithesis. Your primitive brain will see it as the antithesis of conserving energy. And so we're just not in the best frame of mind to go and think, okay, I'm really stressed out and my primitive brain is overworking. And so I need to now go make a list of my network, right? That's just not how your brain's going to work. So I want to invite you to do this before it's necessary. It's prepping for what we know is the inevitable, which is the fact that we are going to go through difficult times in our lives, and we are going to need support. We are going to need people to that network, right? That web underneath you, to be that web underneath you. So making that list and going through that and thinking through, when is this relationship valuable both ways, right? Obviously, what is valuable to you that you get out of the relationship, but then also how valuable is it to pour in to other people, and how do you pour into these people, right? And that was such an interesting realization for me when I took stock of my relationships and I started to observe them, and I started to observe my role in these relationships and really understanding what my gifts, talents, strengths, passions, which could be different. Sometimes they all are, housed under one thing, but often they're different. And how, and I started to look at ways that I could pour these gifts, talents, resources, passions into other people, or to share it. And the really neat thing about that is when you do that, that by nature is going to strengthen that relationship. And so now you're utilizing your relationships in a more, I hate to use effective, but really effective manner, but for both ends, right? We're not trying to per se produce anything. I don't want it to seem like it must be a, utilitarian use of your relationships, but ultimately is going to be a richer, maybe that's a better word, a richer relationship. And so it was this moment of, wow, I am understanding myself better. And not so much I'm putting the focus on myself, but I understand my strengths, my gifts, and my passions, and sharing these and pouring them into other people not only fulfills me, but it strengthens our relationship, and they get value from that. And that was such a powerful tool also, because depending on your personality type, if you are more of a reserved person, I wouldn't say this even has to do with extrovert, introvert, but just a more reserved person, maybe a little more private of a person. Maybe people find you standoffish. This really helped me to build so many relationships, because very often for me in the past, I would come to a relationship or a potential relationship, meeting somebody new, and I would have this feeling of awkwardness as to, what did I bring to this relationship? Why would they want to talk to me? What are we going to talk about? And so when I took stock of my relationships and really thought about all these things I discussed, I realized, oh, here's what I can pour into people. Here is, what I can offer, right? And I don't mean offer as in, I am really organized. Can I come organize your house, right? But it might even be bringing up the topic, right? And when you notice, if organization maybe is your talent or your gifting, and you notice the needs in other people, and you think a little bit about, oh, I noticed that a lot of people that I know that struggle with organization, this comes up very often for them, right? And then when you have a conversation, inevitably your brain, without you thinking, is just going to notice certain keywords and other similarities to other conversations you've had, and that will give you some type of, or something to talk about, because your brain inevitably is going to focus on that and you're going to respond. And when you do this enough times, it's going to become second nature, and it opens up a conversation, and the other person is going to feel heard. Number one, like you're actually paying attention to what they're saying. It gives you something to talk about, but now you have this relationship, and it might be for just that moment, that day, right? I'm not saying this is even going to be a long-term relationship, but learning how to establish those relationships, even if they're in that hour, at that one event, and just learning the value of that, right? For even yourself, and to be appreciative of these relationships, even if they're temporary. Because I know for me, sometimes I think, well, if I'm never going to see this person again, do I really want to put the time and energy into having this conversation with them when I could be doing X, Y, and Z, right? Now, that's a really utilitarian way of looking at a relationship. But just because I really, not as much anymore, but putting myself out there, going into a crowd of people that I don't know. I'm sure that awkwardness is a sense, a feeling that a good majority of people feel, but that awkwardness feels like magnified to me. And when I really took stock of this, and I had things in my head that I knew that were my giftings and talents and keywords I would listen for in conversations where I knew I could interject and make a connection with another person, was really so helpful. And now it's a lot more second nature for me. And also, I love the value that it brings to other people, when I can be a resource for them, not them just being a resource for myself. So I want to encourage you to think about these relationships. Life is all about relationships, right? And during the quarantine, I think so many of us realize how important these relationships are. And if you tend to be a more introverted person, you probably realized, oh, there's so many relationships I am not necessarily purposeful about. So for instance, a work environment, you have coworkers, and maybe you are not, or if you are an entrepreneur and you work solo, you have these relationships with clients. And they by nature are these relationships that you have that doesn't require much effort, right, to go pursue them. But when you are not in contact with these people anymore, we start to realize, wow, I really appreciated, or those relationships, without me acknowledging them, are really important. Maybe you felt a sense of loneliness or isolation, or maybe you even felt a sense of being left out or ostracized because these people maybe weren't purposefully reaching out to you anymore because they just weren't in your daily or maybe even weekly life, right? Especially if they're coworkers, right? Clients maybe have to come back to you to for whatever service you're providing for them, but maybe a coworker that has, the office or cubicle in the general area, and you guys chit and chat once in a while, but during the quarantine, you don't have a personal connection. And so you didn't reach out to each other, right? And that created a sense of isolation. Or maybe you noticed that they kept in touch with other coworkers, but not with you. And it was a sense of feeling left out or maybe even ostracized, right? And I'm not saying that's even true, but we have these emotions within us, right? These triggers. And to a certain extent, we know that they're not true, but it doesn't change the fact that sometimes it triggers a certain feeling, probably dating to our childhood of maybe feeling left out or ostracized. And so realizing that these relationships are so important to you, even if at the time you didn't realize that. So I want to invite you to take stock of these relationships. They're in your life anyhow, right? So how could we make them deeper and richer and appreciate actually what's already there without having, and sometimes, yes, there's going to be these gaps that we intentionally go out and, we want to reach out to people. So I feel that I work with a lot of students, and I mean, even my adults, that I coach. Mentorship is a huge thing that's missing in so many people's lives because it's this amorphous relationship that we don't always know how to define. And we think, oh, as life comes along, there's going to be a mentor. And I want to say that's not true. More often than not, a mentorship is a purposeful relationship that we have to go and find. So I want to invite you, if you feel that I just wish, there was someone who is watching over me, maybe, who is kind of like a parental figure, but they're not necessarily your parent, right? Someone you look up to. That relationship is going to take effort to establish. And know that the other person who you are interested in, it's not that they don't want to have this relationship with you. They may just not even themselves realize the role that they could play in your life, especially if you've never expressed it, right? So you may be filling gaps of relationships that you need, or maybe you're going to see those relationships you have and realize that within those relationships, there's already someone who could be a mentor. But it does take the effort on your part, the intentionality on your part, and it may not happen in a day, right? It may be inviting the person to, whether it's Zoom or a coffee chat, to talk about life, to share about yourself, and to hear them and about their life, right? To invest in that just general connection, So if you're feeling super awkward about it or not even knowing where to start, I would say just start with a connection with these people, even if it's someone you already know, a purposeful connection of no agenda. No, oh, we see each other because we're at a birthday party, but then we leave and then we wait until the next event to see each other, but reaching out and just saying, hey, I just love to grab coffee with you. Can we hop on a Zoom if they're not within distance? And I just like to chat, coffee chat. I think that's been a cool little term we've created. These Zoom coffee chats that a lot of people became familiar with, during the quarantine. But understanding that reaching out to other people and having these intentional relationships is not, I think, as culturally awkward as maybe it once was. And that's a good thing, right? But like I said, it might be a relationship you already have, and it just takes that intentionality of being vulnerable and sharing with yourself, of yourself, and also listening to the other person and hearing what they need, right? Or maybe you want to offer a mentorship. I know so many people in, actually, it's a program we're creating in our chambers of commerce, that we have a legacy program, and we're pairing young new entrepreneurs with more seasoned entrepreneurs. And the response has been amazing because people are looking to pour out to people and people are looking to be mentored, so that's just, but it takes intentionality, right? And so we really wanted to provide that bridge for people. But whether it's someone being your intermediary or you yourself going out and reaching out to people, the start is just forming that connection with that person and that intentionality, right? And just remember, it's two ways. Even if you're looking to be mentored, you want to also hear that other person and know where they're coming from, because they may share, they have, all this time in the world. Maybe they're newly retired and they're wanting to pour into people. Perfect being, right? That makes it easy. Or maybe you hear that they are going through a tough spot in their life And then, and I'm not saying you can't ask for that continued relationship, but just have a realistic view of that, what that might be. They may still want to pour into you just as much if they had more time, but to be realistic and know that you may not be meeting every week or maybe even every month, right? It might be we're texting a lot and we quarterly meet up, right? And I have friends like that where sometimes it's distance, but we make it a point to meet in person. So one of our family friends was visiting. They moved last year, and they have not come back home as often as they had planned. Now we went to go see them. We were within a couple of hours of their home because they live several hours away from us now. But we set aside a whole day to drive to them, and actually a day and a half, and stayed the night and then saw them the next day. And when they came down here, they were really trying to see as many people as possible because it's been so long. And we only met in person for maybe 15 minutes, but just that personal hug between the two of us was so valuable, just to have that maintenance of connection, to make that effort, to know that you are important in each other's lives and you're making an effort, even if things got in the way of you meeting for maybe ideally your couple of hours, right? But there's no less value in those 15 minutes because the alternative is 0 minutes. So the 15 minutes was still very, very valuable just to make that effort and intentionality to see each other. So I want to invite you to think about these relationships and what does your network look like and what would you like it to look like? All right. Thank you so much for being here for Let's Coach. Again, I'm Lani Kim, and I will see you next week. Take care.